pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next up is public forum, limited to 5 minutes per topic. Discussion or comments about town employees or agency members shall be avoided so as not to violate individual rights. Is there anyone here this evening for public forum? All right, seeing none, why don't we move on to the minutes from our last meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I move to accept the minutes from the Board of, for the Board of Selectmen's meeting of January 16th, 2018 as presented.
Second.
Hearing a motion and second, do we have any further comments, discussion, questions? All right, all those in favor of the minutes as presented?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 4-0. All right, next up, we have Massachusetts tort litigation to fight the opioid epidemic. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You may have been reading a little bit about this. I think it was in the Worcester Telegram today that Sturbridge and another community have signed on to this. Copeland and Page, our town attorneys, are part of a group of attorneys leading this fight against the major pharmaceutical companies. They're doing it to essentially say that there have been some improper practices of salespeople and so forth, and doctors who've been prescribing the opioids that have led to addiction and ultimately death in so many cases. I think that the number I saw today, there's 175 deaths a day due to the opioid crisis. So it's a major issue in town. As far as the lawsuit, the first 25% would go to the attorneys leading the efforts. You can see in the attached materials that not only Copeland and Page, but there are some other attorneys that are involved in this, Sweeney, Merrigan, and Copeland and Page, et cetera. The other 25% goes to specialists, other costs that are associated with the lawsuit, and ultimately the 50% in the end, if it's settled or it goes to suit and we win, that 50% goes to the municipalities that have agreed to participate in the lawsuit. Sutton is not immune to this crisis. We've had quite a few incidents and overdoses of opioids. This last year, we've had the largest number. We've had 15 overdoses in transports to hospitals. We've used Narcan 13 separate times, sometimes on the same patient multiple times to try to revive that individual. In 2016, we had 9 transports to hospitals for overdoses and administered Narcan 11 times, 11 separate times. And in 2015, we had 8 overdoses and transports to hospitals. So from 15 to 17, you see now we have 15 overdoses. In 15, we had 8. So the numbers have grown steadily. And it's a major issue that not only the town, but also the state is dealing with, and Governor Baker's doing, I think, a reasonable job on trying to address this issue, but also at the federal government. And the major pharmaceuticals are certainly potentially responsible to some extent for this crisis. So I'm asking that the board support this tort legislation, and that's about it.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Dave, do you have any comments, questions for Jim?
Certainly. To me, this is a welcome opportunity. I certainly agree with your very last comment that I think the major pharmaceuticals have some culpability here. This is an issue that, personally I felt, very directly here in Sutton. And so to have an opportunity to join and contribute with an effort like this who knows what the result will be, but to put pressure on the pharmaceutical companies to act more responsible, I think is an opportunity I welcome. So I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Mike?
Couldn't agree more with Selectman Hall on this issue. Getting a little feedback here. For people that aren't aware of how much the pharmaceutical companies and industry has done in the past, there was a show on 60 Minutes, and I'm sure you could DVR it or go back or find it on demand. And it was just regarding how much corruption there is with the opioids and how it's created this epidemic in a way. I mean, obviously people have to take the pills, but how they were presented to people and sold to the doctors, the sales reps, whoever it might be. So not to go after anyone with a lawsuit, but to kind of look at it and say, it's touched many people, and nobody's immune to this. I mean, the numbers show here in Sutton, just on scale, it's doubled in 2 years. The crisis, the problems that we've had in 2 years. So I couldn't give more support for it. Like I said, that 60-minute special really, touched on a lot of the points that people might have out there, or concerns or questions about, why people are stepping up now and saying, it's time to really, go after these giants of the force in pharmaceutical. One question I do have on it is, let's say, I don't know if this is too far ahead, but if the suit is won and they do settle, the 50% that we get back as communities, can we spend that towards, is it towards education on opioids? Is it?
I don't know that there are any limitations to it, but I can certainly look at that and ask town council whether that there is some restriction on if we are awarded some revenue, where that revenue can be spent.
Great.
Because, ultimately it should go back into support services and other
absolutely.
services that help people addicted to opioids.
Because I look at it, and why I ask that question is because right now, knowing that there's an epidemic, I mean, there's not a whole bunch of funding that's coming to us from the state saying, here you go for education to help these people.
Right.
Whereas that would be a great help. And it's a good fight for the cause, too, to know that, as a community, we may get back money to be able to educate and to help these people that might be addicted or might be heading down that path, or to help them recovery, so that they can come back from it. So,
Right.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, sorry.
Thanks, Mike. Ray?
Thank you. I agree with both Selectman Hall and Selectman Kenny. There is some culpability here, whether it's direct or indirect, is culpability. I too saw the 60-minute special, and it blew me away, to be quite honest. When a doctor sends a young man or a woman, from high school age home with 30 days worth of some painkiller and, for whatever injury, it seems to be callous in their approach. And the same can be said for the pharmaceutical sales. It's just, there's not a lot of thought. It's writing a script, sending them on their way. So if we can get anything out of this, whether we win or not, it's the awareness and maybe waking some people up, especially at the federal level. We hear a lot about it at the local level, and it doesn't seem to be a major focus at the federal level, and we certainly need to do it. So I support this 100%. I'll definitely have my name on this.
Good.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is definitely a very complex issue. And in terms of reaction, I believe, and I could be wrong on the state, but I believe I also heard that Alabama, as a sovereign state, has decided to get involved in this type of litigation movement. So this is definitely a big issue. And obviously it impacts real human beings. So from my perspective, I'm looking at this in the sense that the town has already outlaid, or put out rather, funds in terms of responding to these needs, these emergency calls. So if we could get anything back to help offset the expense of helping or trying to help these individuals, then I definitely think it's worthwhile to pursue. Yeah, so I guess before we move forward, I think we have a motion on this, correct?
Mr. Chairman, a motion to join in mass tort legislation against pharmaceutical manufacturers and distributors.
Second?
Before we vote on this, it is legislation, all right? I thought it was litigation, my apologies.
That's right, I looked twice,
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
like,
All right, so we hear a motion, we hear a second. Any further comments? Any further questions? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, passes 4-0. All right, next up on the agenda is, if I can find the right page, there we go, the HMO contribution rate for retirees over the age of 65. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we go there, I think it's litigation, not
Yeah, I think.
legislation. That's a typo in my cover letter, so my apologies, but I'm sure that's a quick revision.
Yeah.
So everybody understands.
Would we like to amend the vote, or do we think we could proceed as?
I think the intent was litigation. It was just a typo.
All right, excellent. Then why don't we move on to agenda item number 3?
Okay, this is something we tried 5 years ago, give or take, and was to increase the retiree contribution to healthcare to 50%. At the time, the state was looking at OPEB reform, and one of their conditions was municipalities can't change retiree benefits for the next 2 years. That was a precondition of the legislation. The legislation was never enacted. It didn't pass the House and Senate, and it wasn't on the governor's desk for signatures, so it never happened. So on a side note, we still need OPEB reform at the state level, but that's another matter. This is something that's always been within the Board of Selectmen's authority to reduce retiree contribution from 70-30 to 50-50. Now, retirees over 65, most of them are eligible for Medicare, and they all pay 50% of their health care. There are a handful of people, individuals, that never paid into Medicare while they were working. They were hired prior to 1986 when the federal tax reform went into place and the whole FICA and Medicare process contribution happened. People continue to working, but they never paid into Medicare. So they're not eligible to receive Medicare benefits. However, they never had that tax taken out of their paycheck. So they received extra money while they were working because they never paid that tax to the federal government. Now, we're at the point where we would like to change that contribution from 70-30 because all of those non-Medicare eligible people are now on the active plan, and they only pay 30% of their health care. We think it's fair that everybody over 65 pays 50% of their health care. All the Medicare retirees, the people that chose to pay into Medicare or had to pay into Medicare, if they were hired after 1986, they had to pay into Medicare. They pay 50% of their health care. We feel it's fair if everybody that is not eligible for Medicare pay 50% of their health care as well. It's a very small group of people. Most of them are educators that were hired prior to 1986. There is one town individual, a member of the Board of Selectmen, and I had a conversation before he left. But I'm asking the board for support on this article. I did notify all unions that I was going to bring this up. None of them chose to meet with me and discuss it. 5 years ago, the teachers union, Michael Whittier, did ask to sit down with me. We sat down, we talked about it a little bit. I agreed to phase it in over time back in 2013, but then it never ended up happening. And in 2015, when the law failed to pass the legislature, it just kind of dropped. I now understand that I don't have to request impact bargaining with the unions. That was a change in legislation in the interim between 2013 and today. However, I did notify them all that this is a potential change, and none of them have requested to meet with me. So it's up for the board's consideration. Obviously, this would help us, not majorly, but it would help set the tone for not only healthcare, but OPEB, which is a major liability, and we are trying to address the OPEB costs. And considering a couple other matters that aren't before the board tonight, but it is a cost that continues to grow, and eventually the OPEB cost will continue to get larger and larger, and then our regular services of police and fire and education will get less and less monies because we have to fund the legacy costs of pension and OPEB costs. So we're really trying to address this and get ahead of it rather than the alternative to happen. So it's for the board's consideration.
Excellent, thank you. Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I don't have a lot of questions. I mean, this has been discussed, I think, in the Insurance Advisory Committee.
It has. I brought it up, good point, 3 or 4 months ago before the IAC Insurance Advisory Committee. None of them had an issue at that point in time. And then again, I notified them all in writing, and nobody had an issue with it.
So, normally I get concerned and protective a little bit of benefits that we've promised and then change, but this is really in line with other retirees, and it has been discussed for so long. And we've reached out to the unions, even if you didn't have to, and really aren't getting any feedback. I think, I feel like this is a good thing to do at this time. I think you've done your due diligence and been working with the right people for long enough that it's time. It's okay to do. So I support that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Dave. Mike?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I really don't, I had a question, and one of the questions I was gonna have was already answered, and it was, the unions between Michael, Donna, and Elaine.
Yeah.
And if there hasn't, it looks like it was December 29th, where give time to have conversation with the members, and if there were any concerns, comments, or
Yeah.
any rebuttals on it, it would have been plenty of time to have that happen.
Yeah, not a word.
So that would be the only one, as long as that's the way that is there. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mike. Ray?
I have no questions. I would just say I think it's appropriate. I agree with Selectman Hall. I think it's appropriate to bring it up to the 50% and match the remaining group of retirees.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, just to echo, I think, the general sentiment, this is not a new issue. As you stated clearly, this was something that you approached the unions about years ago, and you received little response then. The fact that you, even though you did not have to, once again, went back to give them an opportunity to provide their input, I think that's very generous on your part. I'd also like to, as usual, extend kudos to the financial team, because this is another example of this team looking at potential issues that are on the foreseeable horizon and try to come up with solutions before they become a problem.
Yeah.
So again, great work, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I feel bad in one sense that, again, this is going to be a change, and it's going to be a real change that's going to impact these retirees. But as you said, they didn't pay into the system. So if you didn't pay into the system, the expectation that you should receive an extra benefit in lieu of the fact that they didn't pay FICA, so that they received extra cash all along. I think in that sense, the change is reasonable. So I would assume that this is probably the trend in many communities if this issue comes up.
Yeah, it's not only the trend. In other states, they're taking votes to eliminate retiree benefits, retiree health care.
Right.
So it's a potential. It could happen in Massachusetts. The more money that goes towards these so-called legacy costs,
Right.
and fewer resources going to departments,
Right.
that lowers the service level to the community. It could be a major backlash
Right.
from the public, and we're trying to get ahead of that.
Right. Ultimately, I could easily foresee a recent resident who moves into the town that maybe have children that are in preschool or the elementary school sitting back saying, why are we paying for these teachers that, are long gone? So you're right, in a town system where we do have town meeting that gives the residents a chance to make significant requests, changes, and alterations, that it makes sense that we get out ahead of it as far as we can to kind of offset any potential backlash, if you will. All right, job well done, gentlemen, job well done. All right, so I'm assuming that we're all in favor of this, but why don't I entertain a motion?
Mr. Chairman, motion to increase the HMO contribution rate for retirees over the age of 65 from current level of 70% town, 30% retiree, to 50% town, 50% retiree.
Second.
Hearing a motion and a second, do we have any further comments, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes 4-0. All right. Next up, we have Roadway Improvement Stabilization Fund. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to invite Tim Harrison to come up and, Matt, if you want to come up, I suppose you can, if you're called or if you find it. If not, you can just sit there and look pretty.
Come on up, I got
So, this was a goal that was presented to us over the summer at our annual goals meeting. And clearly, it's an issue in town. It's an issue in all towns, I would feel safe to say. Is just not enough money coming to address roadway improvements. The Chapter 90 monies are nice. The governor has authorized borrowing of an additional $200 million in roadway improvements. That's the standard number that he has addressed for the most years in the past, and that's roughly $450,000 to the town of Sutton. Not nearly enough to do the kind of road work that needs to be done in town. We've got some major lengths of road. You all know what they are. Central Turnpike, Hartness Road, Burbank Road, Boston Road. There are a number of major roads that need to be addressed, and there's just not enough money to do that. So the board charged myself and my administration to look at potential solutions. And we went back, and I really relied heavily on Tim on this matter. Tim was instrumental in developing the Capital Stabilization Fund plan back in 2007. And, Tim was obviously well-equipped to produce this plan. The idea is that we would have a general override at Maytown meeting. And hopefully that passes and is supported by the voters in the local election. The idea is to borrow $300,000. That $300,000 would have the average tax impact on the average household of about $75 a year. And that $300,000 would allow us to do $2 million worth of road work in year one. And in year three, we'd be able to do an additional $1 million of road work. You all have the spreadsheet in front of you. And then, 5 or 6 years down the line, we'd be able to do $500,000. Then pretty much every other year, we would be able to do $500,000 worth of road work. And then it becomes a perpetual kind of solution to a long-standing problem. The Capital Stabilization Fund is similar. The first few years in its infancy, it took a while to build up that fund up. Now we're at the level of being able to deal with capital relatively easily. And we actually use free cash to hold harmless the Capital Stabilization Fund, and so that fund continues to grow. We will be purchasing a piece of apparatus, fire department apparatus, for $750,000. I don't know whether it's in next year's capital plan. It's not in this year's. I think it's next year's capital plan. Through just writing a check. Year one, just write a check for $750,000, done, paid for. And then, that'll take a dip in the account, and then it'll go right back up again. So it's sustainable at this point, which is really our goal. And the same with the Roadway Stabilization Fund. We wanted to create a sustainable solution to address this problem long-term. So that's the big picture. On the smaller picture, we're going to do some other things that provides additional money for roads. We're no longer going to use, and we haven't used in the recent past, Chapter 90 funds to purchase large equipment, the 10-wheelers, the plows, that generally cost about $160,000, $70,000. We're no longer going to use Chapter 90 for that. We're going to use that out of the Capital Stabilization Fund because that's grown and that's healthy. So everything that we get in Chapter 90 is going to go towards road work, but it's just not enough to get the job done over the long term. So this is the plan that's presented. Tim, I don't know if you want to add anything to that?
No, I just playing around with numbers to see what would work. You know, it doesn't have to be 2 million, it could be 2,200,000, you know, this was just throwing out some numbers, let it run, and just see if this thing would actually would work. You know, see if the idea would work. If this thing passes, you know, we'll fine tune how much we borrow in year one, you know, and when's the timing of the next borrowing. And as you see, as it goes further, I mean, the fund does build, so maybe the third borrowing or the fourth borrowing, you know, is larger, you know, or maybe, just like with the capital stabilization fund, when you get out to, you know, 2031, 2032, maybe we're not even borrowing, we're just writing that check for 500,000 and adding it to the Chapter 90, and we're doing $1 million worth of work. You know, so that right now, this is just kind of a concept. I threw down whatever assumptions, like, you know, try to explain where I was coming from so you could understand my thought process. You know, obviously, the borrowing interest rates may change, they'll probably go up over time. You know, again, it's subject to, just like with the capital stabilization fund, an annual vote by the board to increase it by 2.5%. And then, of course, the whole thing is dependent on the town voting to do this general override for 300,000.
Excellent, thank you. Why don't we open up for comments if we could? Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question on the spreadsheet, if I could, Tim. So in year one, we borrow $2 million. The $2 million goes directly to road work.
So actually, the timing is, yeah, it's almost year one. So the way this would work is this May, and then maybe June, we have the ballot question. We get the authorization to add 300,000 to the levy limit. So technically, July 1, you know, the bill, that 300,000 is available, even though the bills haven't all gone out. We say that money's available, it goes into the fund on July 1, 2018. We wouldn't borrow any money until June of 19, so that we have our first debt service payment in June of 2020. So yeah, so as soon as we borrow that money, almost a year later, but still within the same fiscal year, we have $2 million to spend, and we don't make a payment for 12 months later. And that's how we kind of roll from there, but yes.
So for clarification, though, in your spreadsheet, the additional borrowings represent the amount that we're actually going to invest in the roadways in those time periods. And the disbursements from the fund itself are really just paying the debt service.
Correct.
Yes.
So as the fund builds, at least in this model, maybe by the end where you start to build cash, that's when you can actually begin to use what monies are in the fund to actually invest in roadways rather than new borrowings at some point down the road.
Or in, you know, I just called it phase 4 for lack of a better term. You know, maybe, I'll say, you know, 2029, 2030, maybe we're able to borrow another quick hit for $1 million.
Okay, I got you.
You know, there's a cost of borrowing, it's interest, but it gives you the biggest bang for the buck.
Sure.
On that day, for Matt to do, you know, pretty lengthy repair work.
So, for the record, for the board, I intend to support this article, but I do have some questions and concerns, which I think I'd like to just air so everybody can sort of have a sense of what we're going to ask them to vote on. So to that end, I'd love to ask Matt a few questions if I could. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
That's all right.
That's why he's here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Not just to look pretty?
Yeah, no.
so my first question is, in this past fiscal year, roughly how much money did we receive in Chapter 90 funds to be able to spend on road work?
I believe it was 441.
And
That's approximately our payment every year, around 440.
And what did that result in terms of roadways that we were able to pave in terms of miles?
I can't tell you miles off the top of my head. We did Welsh, that part of, the other part of Uxbridge Road, 8 Lots Road, and the short end of Old Providence / Hartness.
Now, just real quick, just because it was asked, I did have a chance to talk to Nick Nunemarker.
Yeah.
And he actually mapped it out, and he said it was just about 2 miles.
2 miles.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds about right. I mean, I have
all the information in the office on how many, I usually count by feet, not miles, but,
We'll just say approximately.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's approximately right, and not counting the crack ceiling.
Yep.
Because, a few miles of crack ceiling, which is
Right.
relatively short money anyways, $40,000 worth.
Right,
of
you
crack.
left some money in reserve so you could do road repairs beyond just,
Correct.
paving. Roughly how many miles of roadway do we have in town to maintain?
95.
95. So if we were to borrow $2 million to do road work, if 400,000, let's say in round numbers, did 2 miles, then an additional $2 million would do another 8 miles?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It just depends on what you're doing to them. The ones that we did, we didn't have to completely reconstruct.
Yep.
Because they were, say, a 5 out of 10, or 4 to 5 out of 10. But like Central Turnpike, for instance, Central Turnpike, I'm pricing out right now from Fuller to 146. We did 146 to Northbridge already. So from Fuller to 146, it's gonna be in the $400,000 to $500,000 range. It's just a little over a mile. And there's more than that from Fuller to Oxford. So you could probably easily do 1.2 million or so just to get from the highway to Oxford.
Okay.
On one of the busiest, biggest roads in town. But it needs most likely more than what we did on Uxbridge Road, just because of the traffic and stuff. We'll probably do more reconstruction than, it depends on the level. There's not really an easy way to say you can do a mile of something. It
Yeah.
depends what you're starting with.
Okay.
If you're starting with something halfway decent, which we do try to do sometimes, because we don't want to just chase the worst ones and reconstruct them, for $500,000 a mile.
Yeah.
If we can also do some, like those 2 miles, we spent approximately $300,000. If we can do some of that and cover 2 miles of halfway decent roads, there's kind of a science to it, which.
So maybe the obvious thing we need to state is that, you've 95 miles of road to maintain, and with the money you got from the state this year, you got 2 miles done. And that's what
That's
we're
a good
facing every year. That's why we have an article like this in front of us to begin with, is because we're just woefully inadequate with the amount of funds that we have available. One thing I want to make clear to people, though, is that just because we may vote for this doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden going to have funds to do, 25% of the town, and every 4 years we're repaving. That's not what we're going to get out of this, What we're going to get out of this is maybe 4 times the funds, or in that first year, I guess 5 times the funds that we would have available. Just understand that 5 times very little is still not very much.
Correct.
So I want to make sure that's clear to the public when we ask them to vote for something like this, that they shouldn't expect to have, all of a sudden, I would say a massive difference in what they notice in the roads being repaired. It's not a magic bullet that's going to fix, everything.
I mean, clearly, we could ask for a lot more and get a lot more done. We could, if we did 600,000, we could get $4 million the first year. But Jim and I thought that, 300,000 at $75 a person on average bill wasn't a lot to ask to start making a dent in improving the roads in Sutton. Clearly, they need work, and if we can just start tackling them, maybe get, with the borrowings, hit some of the worst ones first, and really start to make a difference for the people in town driving on these roads, then, I'm willing to pay $75 extra a year.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because, the level of funding that we're asking for is relatively arbitrary. It's based on, as you say, just an estimate of what you think maybe people would be willing to spend. So, and on the same point, though, the way this model is laid out is that first $2 million is really the big bang. And as we roll forward in the 3rd year of the model, and then to the 8th year of the model, and then to the 11th year of the model is when you're borrowing again, and those amounts are lower than the $2 million. So, even the effect of this is less impactful, as we move forward. But you said to me the other day, Jim, this is a forever problem, and, it's an attempt to do something, so. But I just wanted to make sure people understood that element of it, and, I want to give people a sense of what to anticipate if they were to vote for this, so. The other thing that will come before the board every year is whether or not to apply the 2.5% levy increase to this particular item. And, one question that I had is whether the cost of road materials, what the, inflation rate on that is. And I really don't have, I have no idea if you can answer that
Well,
question.
unfortunately, it's tied to oil, heavily tied to oil, because all the products mostly use oil, which has been stable, but we have had years where, contractors couldn't even bid on work in the spring because they didn't know what was gonna happen with the oil price, so we end up putting language in the contract to protect both sides because, the oil price went so crazy, but it has been stable for a few years, and I would hope that that would continue. And our
Yeah.
pricing has been relatively, through what they're paying for their raw materials has been the same. It's the labor that actually goes up more for them the last couple of years. Their labor's been increasing, but I do have one more number for you. Approximately, we have a pavement management plan. We look at all the roads every year, calculate what we did, we put that into a computer and says, okay, Uxbridge Road got repaved, so it went from, a 4 to an 8.5 or 9 or 10 or whatever. Same with the crack seal roads, they might have went from a 5 to a 6.5 or a 7 because they got crack sealed. So anyways, once we put all that back in, I have figured out over the few years of using the plan, takes us about $650,000 just to move forward. Because what happens is we worked on 2 miles of road, plus say we worked on 3 miles of crack sealing, 90 miles got a year older.
Yeah.
So 90 miles fell backwards, 5 miles went forward. So when you do the math, we actually move backwards a little bit. So our overall ranking, which is approximately a 68 out of 100, went down a hair, a couple percentage points. Where what I can figure is we need about $650,000 a year just to get it to creep forward a little. Not to say it's not going to jump to, 10 points, but just to keep it from falling, just to keep from falling behind. Because you said everything that doesn't get touched gets a year older, and that much closer to, needing
So
reconstruction.
You're saying that the Chapter 90 money you get from the state every year isn't actually enough to even stay even?
No,
It's
if
that,
we
you're
spent
falling
every
behind
dime of
every year.
that on road work, we'd still go backwards.
Yeah.
I think it's the same, in every town probably, but, it's just, I don't know that they ever intended it to be our only source. Chapter 9, I don't think that was ever the intention of it. It was just,
Well-
just a program to give the towns money for roads. I don't know that they
That's-
ever figured it to be that.
That's an interesting point. And I don't know if either one of you guys can answer this, but my thought, as long as I've been around finances, town finances, that that's what other towns do. I mean, that's
It is.
really the major source of funding, I thought, for everybody really was
It is,
Chapter
because
90 funds.
ultimately, it really, other than, Chapter 70, which is for schools generally, and UGA, unrestricted general government aid, which is generally for town government, Chapter 90 is for roads. But we get so little from the state. I mean, we've budgeted, we received close to $50,000 from the state in both UGA and Chapter 70. That's not enough to do anything,
Right.
other than, the cost of living adjustments in the school alone are going up $350,000, and we received $27,000 in Chapter 70 aid. So if it wasn't meant to be the only funding source, there's no other resources that we have. Every other resource we have is going to fund operations within the city, the town, and the school department.
So when this concept was first brought up at our goals and objectives meeting, one of the concerns, my immediate reaction was, maybe a legacy thought, but I always felt like this was really a state obligation. And in my view, federal government is supposed to be, but my thinking, the state gets the money from the federal government, we get our money from the state. And my gut reaction is, I don't feel like this is our responsibility. It's supposed to come from other resources. But, how long does it have to persist this way before you come to some conclusion that you're just not gonna get the help? And so, I've changed my thinking on this, I guess, as I've come to that realization that we're, as Matt says, we're falling behind every year because we're just not getting enough money to be able to do the work. And so, we're not the only town that's considering this. This is an idea that's been floated in a number of other communities. I just don't know what else to do other than to offer the voters in town this opportunity to do this. Honestly, I'm a little concerned about, going to the community right after, saying to the community that the library was something we can't afford because it's just piggybacked on top of some of this other debt, and then right after that, we're gonna come back and say, but we think you should raise your taxes. But with all of that being said, I still come down in the same place. I think to offer the citizens the opportunity to do this, I think it's just the right thing to do. They can vote, they can make their own decision. And so, speaking in a bit of a joke here, you mentioned Hartnett Road as a potential target, and I'm like, I might have to recuse myself because that's my road. But it turns out that every road is in this position, so I guess I'm all right.
My road's great.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's my piece. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thoughtful, thank you, Dave. Mike?
Well, great points, Selectman Hall, on that end. That covered some of the questions I had. One of the things that was brought up was the miles with the 2 million, to reiterate, would get us on a good day 10 miles. Chapter 90 money that year would get us an additional 2, and that's, again, fairly okay roads. So we're looking at 12 miles, pretty much best case scenario for new roading, right? Compared to what we've done before for paving. And that's just to remind that, it's not a lot, but it's a start. And we look at Chapter 70 money, and we every year since I've been on the board and watching prior, is that it's not enough money. Chapter 70 isn't enough. We just know that we're going to have to fund more for the schools. Chapter 70, though, for schools. Chapter 70 for schools. And it's a given every year that we know that the school's going to come to us to ask for more money for the schools because there's not enough money in Chapter 70. It now, after hearing again from Selectman Hall, it makes it clear that Chapter 90, in hearing from you, Matt, Chapter 90 is not enough either. It's never going to be enough. We're going to have to find a way to subsidize it somehow, one way or another. So even though we look at it and say, okay, we're borrowing, $4 million in this scenario here over the course of the years, it's showing it at $4 million on this chart. By the time it's done in 2030, we're up, or 2033, we're 1.2 million into the fund, right? Is that what am I reading this right? So 2033, we're going to have a balance of 1.3 million, right?
The way the
Or
chart's
1.2.
laid out.
The way the
But-
chart's laid out.
But that's basically because, I just decided that, after 4 borrowing, I'm just gonna stop plugging in borrowings.
Right.
Clearly, 2029, I could probably borrow another $1 million at that point,
Yeah.
and it would service that.
Mm-hmm.
So, we can play with this and plug in more, and it will, if it goes through, Jim and I will fine tune this and see what the right numbers are to borrow. That's gonna make this thing, in the timing of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to throw together
Yeah.
a scenario that say, hey, yeah, this thing can work if the voters approve it.
So without doing anything, it's not going to be there. It's the way I kind of look at it and say, okay, it is going back, at a time when we did ask, the library, it's timing wise on that end. There was a lot of feedback for the roads, and that was a concern. Where something has to get done, we have to start somewhere. If we don't, in a year from now, we're going to be sitting here saying the same thing. 10 years from now, unless something drastically happens, and other prior selectmen than that I talked to, it's always going to be an issue, the roads, because we haven't done anything to try to help it out. So I think by laying out a model like this, I'm all for it. I hope the taxpayers are, and they see that unless we do something as a town, it's not gonna, as Mr. Stencil had mentioned, we're getting behind. We don't get enough to even stay even with Chapter 90 money. So unless we do something like this, it doesn't seem like we'll ever get out of that same vicious cycle. So, yeah. But if we do borrow, we have the ability, like you said, that we'll have that ability in 2029 if we decide and we play with the numbers, or you guys play with the numbers. Without this fund, we won't have the ability to do that, right?
Well, that's correct. I mean, our plan is, obviously you see a cash balance of 1.2 million after a number of years. But we can phase in the borrowing to essentially borrow $500,000 every other year. I mean, that's how that $1.2 million can be spent. So it provides options. That on top of the Chapter 90 money, that's $1 million worth of work that we can do on roadways every other year. So that's a significant investment, and our roadway management plan will get better grades over time as a result.
Now, on the flip side, if for any reason Chapter 90 increases over the period that this stabilization fund is set up, or something comes through in the state or the Fed level gives to the states, and I know there's been talk about infrastructure in the country and whatever will happen with that, who knows? But if there were funds to come through, would that go in, or would that just be spent as annual money? Or does it depend on how it comes in?
Right now, Chapter 90 money goes, I sign the contract, and it goes to the highway department to utilize those funds. However, we can, I can give that, we can talk about that authority, and I think that's the quickest way to get it into the highways account, but I will update you and give you any, what's going on, and we can discuss that if the board wants a greater role in appropriating that. But it's essentially just giving those resources to the highway department to implement road improvements.
So the Chapter 90 is considered a grant.
Yep.
So it goes into a special grant account that can only be spent by the highway department for what's allowed under the grant. So it doesn't go into his operating budget to spend how he wants. It can't be used anyplace else. So if that Chapter 90 went up, it just means Matt has more money to spend on roads.
So if it increased for some reason by a lot, it would just, we may not need that fifth phase of borrowing, or we might not need the 500,000 then because there was a bump in Chapter 90. Is that what?
Or means that Matt's gonna be able to do more roads, and we're gonna go from 65, maybe, we'll be going to 75, and maybe we'll get to a point, if your scenario worked out and this worked out, get to a point where, gee, the roads in Sutton are pretty good all over.
And it's the goal we're trying to shoot for. Eventually, we'll
I
try to.
don't want to bring this back to reality, but I highly doubt that that's going to happen. Even the federal government, if they invest in what are they talking, $1 trillion infrastructure bill, that'll be disseminated to 50 states in the country. Massachusetts has 351 cities and towns. The city of Lowell and Fall River and Springfield and Worcester, those big communities will get a big chunk of money. But I'm assuming some of those funds will be distributed similar to the Chapter 90 formula.
Okay.
Because that's the one thing the state has that it knows it can distribute. So it's a formula grant, and they distribute it according to how much money they get. So if the federal government says, here's another, I don't know what they'll say, $100 million, they'll distribute it through the formula grant. So, it won't go that far. I mean, it'll do something, but it's a one-time influx of revenue, but it's not a permanent solution. We'll get a lot of roads done if we get, let's say $5 million in the town of Sutton, which I feel is doubtful, but if that happens, it still won't solve the problem.
So back to reality is that without a fund like this, we're going to be facing this issue in 20 years from now.
Yes.
Is probably
Bottom line
reality.
is, with everything, the school department, everything, we're pretty much on our own.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't rely on the state or federal government to continue to give us money to solve our problems. We have to find ways to solve our own problems and try and be self-sufficient.
Yeah. Agree with you on that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mike. Rick?
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm not gonna, I have a lot of the same concerns as Selectman Hall. I think obviously a lot of thought went into this, and you were mindful of the impact on the townspeople. $75 per household seems, very much reasonable. If we learned anything, I know if I learned anything after the library vote, there was a lot of talk about the roads. And we know that we need the roads repaired. We know we need some work. So this is a much needed move on the part of the town. I'd like to ask Matt, I think I know about this, but maybe for the townspeople, we talked about repairing the roads, but obviously what some people may not realize is the substrates, the bases, and all washout, erosion, all those things, weight, and things that contribute to the roads degrading. Maybe you could briefly explain the difference from adding a top coat to having to restructure a road.
A lot of it just depends on the use, like you said. Like Central Turnpike Central Turnpike's got heavy traffic. They have a lot of truck traffic. Every snowstorm, they have 18-wheelers stuck. They're cutting from 395 over or whatever. So the depth of the pavement and the quality of the base and stuff is a lot more important than on Wildflower, where it's generally just people driving cars. A lot of it too just has to do with where you're starting, which is the key. You want to start on a road if you can before it gets to that point where you have to completely reconstruct it. Or at least you want to use some of your money that way, because you'll be able to do twice as much work. Like with the crack sealing, like we did a couple of miles for $36,000 or something of crack sealing, which will hold off more damage for another few years. It'll buy us a few more years, to that road. But the longer you let it go, the more that you have to do. It gets to a point where you can't crack seal it, and then it gets to a point where you can't overlay it with asphalt, and then it gets to a point where you have to pulverize it and start from scratch. So if we have a system in place to at least catch some of them, we'll still have to reconstruct a few, but if we can catch some of them before it gets to that point, then we're putting good money on good money instead of, letting it totally get to a point where we have no choice but to spend basically the most expensive treatment on the road.
Right. And that's the most important point I'm trying to make is, with the money, it doesn't really go that far. And we have to be mindful of what work and the expense that goes into it and what the impact would be on the town. So, you're trying to get the money for the right roads, get ahead of it, because we'll quickly fall behind. We have fallen behind, essentially. As you said, we're rated about a 68%.
Yeah, which I don't really know what everyone is around here. I hear about some of them, but there's such a big difference in just Massachusetts geography.
Yeah.
You can't compare. I know the guy from Weston was shooting to get to an 80, and I'm thinking that's kind of unrealistic, but maybe it's not in Weston. So it's kind of hard to compare, the towns.
Right.
And the ratings, but a lot of the company that helped me develop this does it for a lot of other communities, and they say that we're probably fairly average for our size town.
And you have no control over what the frost does and raises the roads, and all the damage is done by weather. So this is something that it's important. We know the townspeople want it. I support it 100%. I think it's a great idea, and I hope we get the support of the town. But thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Tim. I definitely appreciate the thoughtfulness and the effort that went into this. I would like to start off with a simple comment to the public. The purpose of this town is to create essentially a constant fund that the town's going to be able to draw on. This will essentially be an override, so it's a permanent increase, as opposed to a debt exclusion, which is what we did with the police station, where we borrow the money, we pay it off, and then it's done with. Once, if a town, I think, would go the way of using a debt exclusion to deal with the roads, that's a one-time bump. They use it, they pay it, and then they're paying it off in the next 20 years. And in conversation that we had, I think the typical new road has a life expectancy of like 15, 17 years, correct?
15 to 20, hopefully.
So that means those towns that try handling this issue by going the debt exclusion route, they're still going to be paying it off before they got to go back and rebuild the road that they spent the money on to begin with.
Right.
So this is going to give us a fund that for years to come, we are going to have some ability to do that extra work. I think of roads like Dudley Road, Marble Road, the roads that were built on old farm paths, Hartness, that the base is not like a modern road, but it was just whatever was there. and then they put asphalt on it, and then they tried putting more and more. But the base is not secure. So those stretches are gonna be way more than the funds given to us by Chapter 90. So having us have this ability to tap a fund like this essentially allows us to control a revenue stream that we can use to address our needs. And we're not gonna have to constantly go back to the taxpayers over and over again. Can you give us another million for this road? Can you give us another million for this road? By using the road plan, you'll be able to come up with a strategy, address those roads that we can, as you said, with short money, stabilize, but some other areas that cost a little more money, really dig in and invest significantly. Now, I'd also like to remind the community, some points that were mentioned, is that we have been moving in the right direction. For instance, using Chapter 90 and dedicating it all to roads. I know there are some communities out there that still use some Chapter 90 money to buy equipment. Well, we're fortunate already to have the capital stabilization fund in place. So, to Jim's point, we're able to basically buy it out of pocket directly. And that's what this fund's gonna allow us to do over time. So, again, $74, it's a amount of money. I'm not gonna belittle that amount of money. But I think in terms of the potential benefit, in terms of moving the marker up, I think it will be money well spent, that's for sure. And again, it goes back to conversations that we've all had in terms of self-sufficiency, which was a huge point made by Dave, and I definitely appreciate that. You know, the money's not gonna come from Washington, DC. The money's not gonna come from Beacon Hill. So unfortunately, us as taxpayers, we're gonna have to shoulder a little bit of the burden in order to make it so that way we can, again, move the needle a little bit forward. Maybe take that D+ rating to the C- range, you know, and see some long-term improvements.
Yeah.
So kudos, gentlemen, for all the work that you put into developing this plan.
Are you finished?
I think so.
Can I make just a couple other quick comments?
Sure, absolutely.
I promise to be quick. You mentioned a couple of things, one of which I thought was, I had meant to talk about it, was the nature of this fund, if we were to vote for it, requires that the money that's raised under this goes into the stabilization fund and can only be used for this purpose.
That's
So
right.
if the taxpayers vote for this, they can be assured that they're voting only for this purpose. It can't be commandeered in by some future board for some other purpose. It's only this, so.
And we will
there's some-
set it up, not to cut you off, Mr. Selectman, but that we'll set it up where an appropriation goes to the road, and no different than the capital stabilization fund. If there's any left over from that, a specific road, it'll go back into the the roadway stabilization fund. Similar to the way the capital stabilization monies go back into that plan if it's not used to purchase a piece of equipment. You know, if we only use $700 out of $750,000 to purchase the equipment, the other $50,000 goes back into the capital stabilization fund. It'll be no different with the roadway stabilization fund.
And Tim, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I was doing some reading on this the other day and discovered that, you know, apparently this stabilization fund and the other one is under a special rule that's been created under the Prop 2.5 statutes. And it exists in a way that allows the Board of Selectmen in any given year to decide not to raise the levy for this thing if they so chose, because, let's say, there was some big funds that came in from the federal government and you felt like you had enough money in your fund, you could suspend raising the levy if you wanted to for a period of time, and then go back to raising it later if you needed to, because it would already exist. So I may be wrong about that, but that's what I read.
I'm not 100% sure, but I will definitely look into that.
You know, staying with reality, I guess I'm in that same camp. I don't think it's likely we'll find ourselves in that position, but I think that's there. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I would entertain a motion on this item. Or would I? No, I would not. No, I would not, because this is going to.
Yeah,
future town meeting.
ultimately, you know, this will be on the warrant for the board to sign in April. If it sounds like the board is willing to sponsor this article, from what I hear, so I will present this article when the motion, the motion to sign the warrant is before you and have the Board of Selectmen sponsor this particular article.
And of course, when we get to that point, if there are people in the public that have comments about it, we can address them then.
Yeah, and it'll go before the Finance Committee. They will give their comments and so forth, so.
All right, wonderful. All right, well, then next up is a request to overspend the snow and ice budget for fiscal year 2018. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're at that time of year. I think always the first meeting in February. We have this before the board. The rules have changed slightly. The law was amended in 2016. Now it's the chief administrative officer for the town that can authorize this, so I play that role in the town of Sutton. But we have a history of going before the Board of Selectmen, so I intend to continue that practice. To let you know what's going on versus just an update. And two, it's a chance to bring in the highway superintendent. You can ask how it's going so far this year and so forth. So I'll continue with this process. Right now, we are over $200,000 in expenditures. We budgeted $175,000. Obviously, Matt just purchased quite a bit of salt that's not accounted for in the munis account. So right now, we're probably $225,000, $230,000, and we budgeted $175,000. Tim and I have talked about increasing the snow and ice budget to $200,000 next year, which is a $25,000 increase. It seems appropriate to do that at this point in time. We haven't been below $200,000 in a number of years. The issues before you tonight to approve overspending snow and ice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave, do you have any comments for Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim, I guess I appreciate your bringing this to us regardless of the fact that you don't need to do that. Although it's kind of funny because every time this comes up, I wonder what would happen if we said no. It's it's kind of a moot point in a way. Seriously speaking, as we saw with school bus incident and that kind of thing, people expect to have the roads maintained and salted. That you said something to me a long time ago, that people's attitudes about what's possible today have changed a lot. And in the middle of snowstorms, people want to be able to get out and drive around. So, I think it's demanded of us. So, and it's moot. So, I support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mike?
I'll start off by saying I definitely support it. And thank you, Jim, for bringing it to our attention. So is it an increase of 55,000 if we're at like 225, 230 now, or are we going to go above in budget for what may be to come if we need to supply more salt or?
Well, right now, we will use available funds at year end, and it typically comes out of free cash at year end to cover the deficit. We've never pushed it forward to the following fall and used the recap process to raise those funds. We've always dealt with it at year end. Right now, the plan is to use free cash to offset this deficit. The deficit will probably climb. Right now, it's 230. It's probably going to be 300 and. You don't know what the winter's going to bring, but it'll be significant, but we got available free cash for appropriation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question, sorry. I talked to Mr. Stencil a little bit downstairs on the way up about it, and kind of remember last year also talking about it, but for the people back home and kind of remind me, the reason for budgeting it lower each year, because every year, obviously, you can't predict what's going to happen, but you can predict that we're probably going to need to borrow again to fulfill the needs of the winter. What's the reasoning behind it of budgeting lower for the snow removal, ice and snow removal, rather than budgeting higher and having leftover at the end?
You want to address that, Tim?
Yeah, the way the law reads is you can't budget less than the year before.
Okay.
So most communities are reluctant to increase it because then they get stuck in. So if all of a sudden climate changes and now we got a couple winters that are not bad and we don't need all that, but they're forced to budget that amount in the snow and ice account. There's a report that goes that I have to sign. It's all part of the free cash process and the recap process that says how much was appropriated, how much did we spend, how much money did we get, if there was any money like FEMA or MEMA for snowstorm. It's all reported to the state. So that's why most communities, and it's an account that can be legally overspent, and you don't have to cover the deficit by June 30. You can raise it on the recap. So most communities do that. They don't purposely under budget, but they don't budget to the levels that they probably should, knowing that they legally can overspend it, and gives them some flexibility on how they want to cover it at year end. Today in our department head meeting, which I've been doing the last couple of years, is I hand out to the departments a history of 10 years of their department. So they can see, as we're in the budget process, you know, they can see how much money their budget has increased over a period of years, and just, it's information.
Okay.
Well, one of them is snow and ice, and, you know, Jim and I talked about it today. For the last 6 years, we've spent anywhere between 200 and 350. Doesn't make sense to budget 175 for 19. We're never gonna be lower than 200. So we
It's-
agreed, we're gonna go to 200. We're not gonna go to 225, 250 yet, let's just go to 200, and let's, you know, and we'll just do it in baby steps. So when we have other departments that have needs, we have a revenue expenditure gap, we have to look at the big picture, but it's reasonable to increase it a little bit more again. We
Okay.
went from 150 to 175, now we go 175 to 200, and let's just,
So
Yeah, we
to understand, if this winter comes in at 350, if we were to say, okay, well, you know, we know that we're gonna have a winter at 350, and we budgeted at 350, the following year, we would have to budget at 350.
You're stuck.
correct.
Now, no matter what we budget at, though, on the low end, obviously, we're not gonna not spend, because we have these meetings where we come in front and we have no problem approving. Like Selectman Hall had mentioned, it's not gonna be a no, you have to spend the money. So if you come in, the law allows us to come in at the 200, or the increase of 175, and able to spend as much as it costs that winter, if we have to, with no problems. But if we were to budget at that high level, we couldn't the next year drop down to the low level again, or if we didn't have the winters that we've having, we couldn't go lower again, correct?
Right.
All right, I got it. I knew that there was something, that there was a complication on it, but I just wanted again to reiterate it, and then people at home, you know, the last few storms, to know that when the department comes in front of us to borrow, it's okay. It's should be expected, in a way, because we can't control the winters. And we're not going to say no, because we know the importance of safety on the roads. And in order to budget it that way, we'd be taking away, or could be possibly taking away from other needs in town, and we'd be stuck budgeting it that high, right?
Right.
I got it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, pretty
Thanks,
much
Tim.
every city and town underfunds snow and ice.
Okay.
All the surrounding towns that I have lunch with, Northbridge, Douglas, Millbury, they all underfund that account, and then they look to raise it either on the recap or cover it at the year end.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Ray?
I'll begin by saying that I support this. I think it's, again, the right thing to do at the right time. You know, like you say, every year we're looking for the increase, and if we haven't gone down, we're certainly not going down at this point. I have a quick question for Matt, though. On average, I'm gonna give you two scenarios: 6-inch snowstorm and just that ice storm that we had the other day. We have a change in temperature with some water in those two scenarios. On average, what are we looking at?
Well, to do the plowing of the 6 inches, it'd probably be about 15 to maybe 20 grand. The ice, if we're just doing it once, just one round, we call it, would, as long as it's at night and everyone has to get paid overtime.
Yeah.
It'd probably be about 5,500. It's about 4,000 in salt and 1,500 in labor. Like
Adds
today,
up quick.
today we went out and it wasn't on overtime, so
Yeah.
we used one round. The problem with this year is we've had these rain a few times, and
Yeah.
we've had a couple of nights where we went out and then it washed away, and we went out again, and we went out again, and everyone's like, "Oh, we didn't really get that snowstorm. We got like an inch of slush and then some rain." And I'm like, "Yeah, we used 3 rounds of salt. You know, we used $12,000 worth of salt, and then a good amount of labor on next to nothing. Where if we had just 6 inches of snow instead of that rain, we would have spent the same. You know, it would have been just a little
You
more
have those
straightforward.
scenarios where the temperature drops 10 degrees like that without being aware of it, so.
Right, so.
But, yeah, I was just trying to make a point. You know, it's expensive, obviously. I mean, and especially when it's overtime, there's a lot of cost, there's a lot of cost involved.
Yeah, it usually happens at night.
Yeah.
Nights and weekends.
It doesn't always, right? But
Not
thank
all
you.
the time, but-
That's all I had. I appreciate the response. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. First off, Jim, I think coming back repeatedly before the board with this issue, even though you don't have to, it's definitely a sound policy. Because to me, I think one of the words that we like to banty around, but we take it seriously, is transparency. So again, this is, you're being forth in coming with us as a board, but also the community as well. So that way they're aware and they understand that there's a real cost associated with this. But having the ability to increase the budget also goes to planning, because you know it's gonna happen. So the financial team had put contingencies in place to be able to fund these overages. The point that I'd like to make to Matt, and I think you touched upon it, is really key. There are some nights where you gotta send the guys out multiple times. So at least to the community, one of the things that I would like them to be aware of is that we have a very hard-working highway department. And our guys spend hours and hours and hours in those trucks making, be it the salt runs or the plowing runs. And if the conditions are bad, they're out on the road. I know when I got to come and hang out with the highway department, I had to leave a little early, but, you know, I had put in 14 hours at the point when I left, and I talked to some of the drivers, and they were out there for 5 more hours. So they work long days, and they're dedicated to making sure that the roads are as safe as possible. So again, just awareness on the part of the community, I think, is very, very important. Yeah. And also, like you said, it's always easier to do it at night than opposed to the daytime.
Yeah, yeah, and, I mean, to your point, Jesse, thank you, because I think the guys appreciate hearing that.
I'll be honest with you, after spending the day with them, they're my heroes.
We-
I mean, they're tough, dedicated crew.
We also went out on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day.
Right.
And I didn't really have any problems getting anybody to come in, you know. All of our guys were there, I should
Right.
say. Some of the hired outsiders, we missed a couple on Christmas Day, but, you know, it was 3 AM on Christmas, and I think we went home around 8 or 9, I think. Let's see. No, we finished at 1:30 PM, actually, on Christmas Day, so. And all our guys, they're dedicated, you know.
Right.
They're there,
Well, I'm not
all of our
gonna,
employees anyways.
I'm not gonna mention any names of the employees that I talked to, but I know they said, you know, they get the call from you, and they're usually at the barn within a half hour, and they're loading the trucks, prepping the trucks, getting ready to go, and they don't go home until the work is done.
Yeah, we don't have spare, I mean, we have extra drivers, extra people that help us, extra contractors that work for us. But, you know, we have our regular guys and they're on for everything all the way through the winter. There's no storms when they're gonna be home sleeping. It's just too small of a town, too small of a department, you know, to have that. There's no shift. If it keeps snowing, they're still there, you
Right.
know.
And that's on top of their regular 7 to 3, 7 to 4
Right.
shift.
Right.
So again, just understanding and appreciation, I think, from the community is definitely very important, particularly in these stressful situations that pop up every now and then.
Right.
So, great job, guys, great job.
Outstanding job, for sure.
I just had one quick question.
Sure, Mike, what do you got?
Thank you. In comparison to other towns, the size of our department, average, below average, or larger with our equipment?
I would say it's probably about average. It's
Okay.
Everybody does things differently. We only need one guy to do like the cemeteries and a couple of parks. You know, some towns have a lot of big parks, and they also do the athletic fields and grounds for the schools and stuff like that. We have a separate department for that, so it's, you know, some also do water and sewer, so it's kind of hard to compare. But I'd say it's fairly close on, you know, highway to highway, if you can even distinguish that, because like I said, everyone kind of blurs those lines a little bit differently in different towns depending on their needs, but.
But you feel good with the
Yeah, I'd say it's
equipment
pretty
in the
standard, and we could always use more, but, you know,
yeah,
it's not,
conversation
talk
for
about that
another
today,
day?
you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, absolutely.
I'm just glad it's not snowing tonight. so.
Thanks,
You know,
Mr. Chairman.
for an example, I've worked in Lowell and Fall River, as the board knows, and Fall River, we only had 20 pieces of equipment. For a city that size, 100,000 people, we only had 20 pieces. What we did was we called people in, and we had 130 pieces of equipment on the road. Only 20 were the towns, or the cities.
So subcontractors.
So we contracted out and paid a certain wage, we advertised, and we assigned the routes and so forth. So you really can't afford the amount of equipment that it takes to fight a winter storm. So you've got to, in the cities, you've got to hire out all these contracts. And, municipality, we happen to have the amount of equipment to handle it for the most part. We do have some private contracts. Seven.
6 or 7, depending on the year and stuff. We try to keep of private contractors that bring their own truck and we pay them.
Right.
But we have a sewer guy that comes and helps with the sewer truck, and the cemetery, Jimmy, helps with the cemetery truck, and,
So ultimately, you can never get that kind of equipment, and you don't want to invest all of that equipment for just 3 months out of the year.
Correct.
So,
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
All right, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, motion to overspend the snow and ice budget for fiscal year 18.
Second.
Hearing a motion and second. Do we have any further comments or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 4-0. All right.
Guys,
Next.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
thanks, Matt.
That's all right. I was just moving things along. All right, next up on our agenda is item number 6, which is to approve and execute a TIF agreement with Prime Metal Technologies.
This isn't on your agenda, and I apologize for that. Actually, I think there's a two-step process. What I need is a vote for the board to consider an item that wasn't posted on the agenda, and it's related to Prime Metals.
Mr. Chairman, I move to allow the board to consider the TIF agreement, the signing of a TIF agreement going forward for Prime Metals at tonight's meeting, in the absence of having it on our agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes 4-0.
Thank you very much. This came up, we had a conversation with Prime Metals yesterday, I think, and they asked that upon town meeting, if town meeting approves the TIF proposal next Monday night at the special town meeting, if the board could sign the TIF agreement at that point in time, because they're on a rush to get the landowner's signature, the Board of Selectmen's signature, the owner or the controlling parties from Prime Metals' signature, to submit an application to the state EACC by March 15th. So they're on a tight timeline, and waiting to February 20th didn't fit their timeline. The application for the March state meeting is February, the end of that week, the 16th or whatever that date is. So waiting to the 20th, February 20th wouldn't work for them. So that's why we need this article, this motion to support this. After the meeting on Monday night, the special town meeting, if it passes, then the board can sign this, and then Prime Metals can take it and visit the owner of the property, and then have their signatures, get a certified vote from the town clerk, and then submit the whole application by the end of the week to meet the deadline for the March 15th EACC meeting.
Excellent. I think more than reasonable.
So,
Dave, do you have any comments for Jim?
Well, one comment would be, when we say we're business-friendly, then I think this would be actions that would support that. Is the TIF agreement itself, like, completely drawn up? Has it been reviewed by council? I mean, it's ready to go?
We're expecting a draft later this week, and we'll get that draft, and I'll forward it to town council, but we don't have that formal draft right now. We have an example of a TIF agreement that we got from MOD, Mass Office of Business Development, that was forwarded to us at Jen Hager's request. So we know the general structure of the TIF agreement as they exist today, the job requirements, et cetera. But until we get the final one that town council will review, that's the agreement that'll be before the special town meeting Monday night.
So it just sounds like there's a lot to do between then and now to get it in a state ready to be signed. But, I mean, assuming that all occurs, I would be happy to support it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mike?
It does seem like a lot. Is there enough time to have that approved in time to have attorneys look at it by the end of the week and have it ready for Monday for signature?
Oh, yeah. Tom McEnany will
He's
be
quick.
at the special town meeting,
So-
so.
So, back to business-friendly, do we know if any of the competitive or the competing towns have had any anything lined up for special meetings, at the town meetings that they have had. If they need this done by a particular date, it doesn't seem to make sense that there'd be another town coming in March, right?
It's a good question, you know, it actually goes right to the point.
Yeah.
It's hard to dance around that, but, you know,
I mean, how are you feeling about it after that?
you know, listen, I'm controlling what I can control for
Right.
the town. And we are pushing, Jen Hager and myself and the rest of the team are pushing as hard as we can to make sure everything is done. The call we had yesterday with Lynn Tokarzik was a positive call. They seem real excited to move forward with this. They're anxious to get everything signed Monday night and Tuesday to go before the state on March 15th. I asked whether February 20th was an option. She said, no, it's not an option. We need it done by February 16th, the end of the week, next week. So that's some potential positives. You know, I know Worcester really doesn't want to lose this company, and I wouldn't want to lose this company if they were looking to relocate from the town of Sutton. I would be fighting hard to keep them here. So, I mean, that's the one unknown. I don't know that we're competing with Devon's or another community. I think really our competition is the city of Worcester. Yet we've got some advantages that Worcester doesn't. We don't have a split tax rate. We have a single rate. Our rate is $16.55 per thousand. Worcester's is $29 per thousand. So the tax rate alone in Worcester is significantly higher than it is in Sutton. You know, and the difficulty of finding a building or land at least of 185,000 square feet is significant in Worcester. You know, there aren't a lot of parcels in Worcester that can accommodate that. So, you know, with that being said, I honestly don't know how this works out for us. I'm just, you know, I'm pushing as hard as I can until they make a decision, and then it's done. But up until that point, we're going to continue to make an effort. Jen Hager and I plan to attend the EACC meeting at the state level, even though municipalities can't address or talk about anything. But we want to show the town's support. We really would like them here, and hopefully they make that decision.
I think also to kind of comment on that is that, you know, that definitely as a board we appreciate, or I appreciate, speaking for myself, the work that yourself and Jen have put behind it.
Yeah.
And definitely doesn't go unknown to have them get to this level, whether they decide their decisions are their decisions.
Right.
But to know that we definitely came up and swung the bat and tried everything we could to hit the ball out of the park and bring them to Sutton.
You're right.
You know, we really did. And to me, after hearing that, it sounds like they want to move a lot quicker. Now, again, it could be just to make sure that this option's still in place. The other option could still be in place too, to keep their options open, or it could be that they've made a decision not which way they're leaning, but they're not letting us know either way, huh?
You know, they came to the town of Sutton on January 4th and asked for a meeting to sit down with Jen Hager and myself. And
They want us to
we didn't
sign.
know what it was all about. We didn't even know how to spell prime metals. But, you know, that was, you know, 30 days ago. And we are where we are now. Significant progress. I'm hopeful. I'm
good.
hopeful.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mike. Ray?
I have no questions. I just, I support it, though. I'm in that camp.
All right, very good. Yeah, I don't want to be overly optimistic, but hopefully this is a good sign. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to put a message out to the community that it's almost a done deal and have, you know, God forbid, something fall through. So let's just say everything's moving in the right direction. Excellent work on your part, Jen's part, and, you know, hopefully, you know, come summertime, we'll have a wonderful story to share with the community. All right, I'll entertain a motion on this item. Actually, do you have the language for it? Yeah?
Yeah, it's on the.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Chairman, motion to approve and execute the TIF agreement with Prime Metal Technologies contingent on town meeting approval.
Second.
Hearing a motion and second, do we have any further comments or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes 4-0. All right, next up on the agenda is Town Administrator's Update. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a few updates for the board. The governor presented his budget on January 24th. He's calling for a 3.5% increase in state aid. That really is kind of a misnomer. It's really UGA funds, general government funds. Chapter 70 is only going up $20 per student, which is roughly $27,660. Not generally, that is the number. You know, and I've mentioned it before, cost of living adjustments at the school department alone are going up $350,000, so that $27,000 doesn't really go that far in the big picture, and I think Selectman Kenny mentioned that earlier. So I have actually budgeted both within the budget, which is kind of unusual. I generally wait until fall town meeting to do the final appropriation, but knowing that the governor's numbers are kind of the lowest number that we start with, and the legislature typically increases that, at least on the Chapter 70 numbers. I'm hoping and pushing, as is Superintendent Fred, for an increase in Chapter 70. We've contacted our senator and representative, asking them to advocate for an increase in Chapter 70 money. It's just not enough. They've got a $15 million budget, and this $27,000 doesn't really make much of an impact at all. It's unfortunate, but I'll present the budget to the Board of Selectmen at the next meeting on February 20th. Cell tower update. A Wireless Edge was on site on Tuesday, January 30th, to deal with a drainage issue. One of the issues is they put the what do they call them? The conduits that essentially go from the street out to the cell tower site, and they dug a conduit along adjacent to the Wayne Whittier's farmhouse up on Town Farm Road. Since then, Wayne has experienced some flooding in that basement, which he didn't experience in the past. So that was a concern, an issue that we've had to deal with over the last month. The Wireless Edge has hired an engineer to design, and we've allowed them to tie into the catch basin to allow drainage to go out to the street and ultimately down to the fields, and ultimately at Hotel Pond, which is further down near Central Turnpike. So that issue has been addressed. Hopefully it solves the problem. If it doesn't, we'll be out there again trying to fix that problem. We have connected Kevin Shaughnessy from National Grid with John Arthur from Wireless Edge. Verizon's ready to go. What they need is power. And right now they're working on the design of the power. They intend to bring the power from the east side of the road over to the west side of the road, where all the poles are on the east side of the road. This will bring it over to the closer to the cell tower site, adjacent to the field. So I don't know whether they're going underground, whether they're going to create an overhead pole. My assumption is that's the decision that they'll choose to do, the overhead. But we just need that process to take place. So I am pushing. I've contacted John Arthur every week or 10 days to get an update. I'll continue to update the board regularly throughout this process. So I'm hoping that John Arthur has had a conversation with Kevin Shaughnessy and beginning the process of identifying the work order number and the process to get a pole relocated. And that's ultimately a poll hearing that comes before the Board of Selectmen, and you folks will hear about that hopefully shortly. Community compact applications. We actually just finished a community compact, two community compact projects essentially that were funded through DEP, DOR. And those were budgeting and forecasting. We worked with DOR and they came out and met with, were you there, Dave?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Chairman Bannon from the Finance Committee were there as well to discuss the budgeting process. It was a very positive process. We learned a lot, and we actually got a lot of knowledge to help us with our forecasting for the future. That was helpful during the S&P visit, that we had a forecast, 5-year forecast available to show them. That was an important process in that whole upgrade of S&P. We have applied for the second round for an application. It's called ClearGov application, and it goes on the web page, and it essentially allows, it's a best practice in transparency. It allows residents in a very visual format to look at the budget and to allocate the numbers in different ways. You know, if you allocate another $1 million over the school department, what it does to the rest of the budgets. And you deal with the circumstances and understand this is the reality. So it gives the public an opportunity to get involved with the budgeting process and understand the issues we face on a regular basis. So I felt that was an important tool. They've actually agreed to fund the first year. It's $5,500. It's no cost to the town. We'll get that application hopefully shortly in the next month or so. The second application is for the fiber network that we are working on with the police station. Dennis is writing that application. My assumption is he will apply for $150,000 to $200,000 for fiber. Our plan is to install fiber from Town Hall, the tower above, behind Town Hall, down to the police station, ultimately down to Manchog Water tank, where there's a communications tower on top of that. So that's phase one. Phase two is to bring it over to Wilkes neighborhood, where there's a tower adjacent to the Wilkes water tower. Right now, that tower is 75 feet. Our plan is to put a 100-foot monopole at that tower, 25 feet higher than the existing tower, which is above the tree line, and we'll get better reception from that. And the idea is to bring fiber from Town Hall down Boston Road, across the street, over to Wilkes water tower. That's what this application is for, is to fund that extension of the fiber. So the original $600,000 in free cash is at the special town meeting, where we plan to appropriate, which will allow us to run fiber from Town Hall down to Manchog Water Tower, as well as simulcast antennas and other kind of resources that we feel, or at least our consultants feel, is imperative to improving our communications. I think the communications will be significantly improved over what we currently have, as does the chief, and both chiefs feel that way. And so I think that's a good application that we're applying for through the community compact grant. We've been hopeful. We've had conversations with the lead at the community compact organization. I know Senator Fatman's involved in trying to work with the state and trying to see if there's money available for this. 25R Putnam Hill Road, the sale was Thursday, January 25th. The board set the minimum price at, I believe, $3,500. We received a bid from Timothy and Shayna Fisher in the amount of $5,250. So we've issued a notice of award. The Board of Selectmen can sign the purchase and sale agreement. Is it before them tonight? So it's before you tonight. It'll be one of the documents you sign this evening. And that's, it's a back piece of land that was not valuable to the town, and we're now collecting taxes on it, as well as receiving $5,200. And again, special town meeting is this coming Monday, February 12th at 7 p.m. at the middle school, high school auditorium. And there are 4 articles: a TIF for prime metals, utilization of the bond premium for the new police station, an article for fiber network and simulcast antennas, and lastly, for the sewer department, retained earnings for motors and actuators and other kind of appurtenances. A couple other notes, I just want to, we did an all-call for Code Red yesterday, I think. You know, essentially letting the public know we have this system now, an early notification system, and asking the public to, if they didn't receive this call, or if they knew of somebody that didn't receive the call, you know, let them know about the site on the town's webpage that allows people to sign up, various cell phone numbers, et cetera. You know, the problem today is a lot of people have given up on landlines, and they use cell phones almost exclusively. So, you know, this was an effort to get people involved and notified of it. We're also going to put a notice on the bulletin board outside the fire station out here at the center, just to increase the awareness. I want everybody involved with this, so when there is an emergency, you know, it's an easy, we make the call and the public is aware of it and can take appropriate actions. And lastly, obviously there's a new table around us, and this was thanks to the town, essentially, for approving a capital item a year and a half ago that authorized this. The work was done through Fairview Millwork out on 146. They do great work, obviously. The lead on this was the cable department. Pam Nichols, Christine Hicks were instrumental in getting this done. I can't identify colors or anything else, so I just I deferred all the judgment, but they did a great job. John Kuchar as well. So it was a team effort, but certainly the quality of the table is much more presentable versus the masking tape Formica table of the recent past. We are looking at the chairs, and we will be, you know, looking to figure out what type of chair works here. We probably need to talk to a chair expert. I don't know if you know anybody.
Look somebody up.
But you know, that's the next step, and then we're done. We put some money in the operating budget to fund new chairs for the meeting room as well. That's all I have for updates, Mr. Chairman.
Wonderful, thanks, Jim. Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was a great update, Jim. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to start with the cell tower. You know, more than the roadways, what I hear about most often is the cell tower. You know, it's been one issue after another, but I think that the overriding thing that I want to communicate to the town is that it's coming. You know, it may take some time. There's a lot of things to work through, but it is coming. So hang in there. It'll be there before you know it. So thank you for the update. I'm glad you put that on there. Actually, I had considered calling you this week and asking if you could give us an update, and I forgot to do that, so thank you. I wanted to mention the community compact applications for just a moment. My first comment is I have a sense from you that these things are a little more valuable than maybe you anticipated they might be to the town early on. I think you were a little dubious about that, I think. But it sounds like we've been able to take advantage of some things that have been helpful, so that's
and it's nice that they're actually putting money behind a lot of them.
Right.
The first ones were just advice from DOR, but these are actual resources that are coming to the town. So in some ways, it's not funded at the level Green Communities are, but you know, it's similar to Green Communities. You know, we agreed to join that network, and we've received over $650,000 in grants.
Yeah.
So.
I did have a specific question about the fiber network application, and I wasn't sure from what you had said if this is an extension of the plan for the fiber network, or is it really going to help offset some of the costs that we've already planned?
No, it's actually phase 2 of the fiber plan. It involves the original phase is going from Town Hall down to Manchog Water
So
Tower.
those other
This
things
is
are
going
an extension.
over to Wilkes Water Tower. So that additional extension is approximately $200,000.
Okay.
You know, I don't know whether the community compact will fund all of it. If not, then we will probably look to a capital appropriation, maybe at fall town meeting, maybe next spring, to fund the additional amount. You know, I'd like to get all of the fiber in place prior to the police station opening.
Since we're talking about it, would just like to use this opportunity to restate how significant I think that this project is, and we're going to talk about it at a special town meeting, but this is something I really hope the town supports because it's very important for our communication. So And, you know, lastly, I'll just talk about these tables. They are gorgeous and such a significant upgrade over what we had. I think we're gonna do better work here, so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mike? I feel it tonight. I was wondering, I'm going, what is it, in the air or something? I'm like, I feel smarter. It's gonna be the room. It's, you know, your surrounding, you know? Cheers, though. I can remove the phone book for those at home that can't see it. Thanks for the update. It's pretty much covered by Selectman Hall. A couple of questions I had. I did have a chance to drive by and see the water issue up there. It's amazing how a little bit of movement on soil can create. I mean, there was a hose that was just pouring out water.
Yeah.
And whether it's pumping from the basement or the dig site, whatever it may be, just that little bit can change a lot.
Yeah, and, you know, Wayne's son, John, has done, really a lot of work down there and pumping out the basement and so forth. So it's a shame that they're going through that. You know, they've been nothing but supportive of this whole project. And, hopefully we can figure out a way to, address that.
Excellent. That would be it for me. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thanks, Mike. Ray?
Thank you for the update on the cell tower. I too am very interested, as I've said in the past. I'm hoping it's up and running. I envision myself using my phone the day I'm driving out of here to head to the airport to go to Waco.
I'll let you know how it works. I'll let you know.
But I know, I really appreciate you keeping an eye on it and really pushing this thing forward. It's something that the town needs, and we're getting close. I mean, it's not just a monument over there. It's going to actually work very soon.
Right.
Appreciate that. And I'll reiterate what Selectman Hall said about the communications. We really need it, and I support it 100%. You know, having had a brief stint with the Sutton Police years ago, I know the struggles with communication in this town. There are a lot of dead spots, and that could cause someone's life. Trying to get information across. So we need to get this done. We need to get it done soon. Question on that: when you talk about fiber, I assume that's all overhead. You're talking about running lines from pole to pole.
Yeah.
I know I have fiber over at my house with FiOS. Is any of that fiber usable? Can they use that as part of their system, or do they have to run all new fiber?
Yeah, these are new fiber network that needs to be run. However, it will reduce the operating costs for the town because it'll. And to be honest, I don't understand exactly how that will work. And Dan Durgan's been advising us that we won't need, cable for all these different departments: the highway, the water, the sewer treatment facility, the senior center. They will be able to run on fiber for cable and. All the cameras that we currently have down at the highway department to, observe the gas tanks, making sure that people using the gas tanks are authorized. Those cameras can now go over the fiber network, and so there's no cost to that then. So I don't know how it will reduce the cost, but I'm told it will reduce the cost, and I'll give you a further report as I understand more of it. But there's really two bangs for the buck. Not only do you get fiber to improve the communications, but you get fiber to reduce the operating costs of the town. So,
thank you. And I don't know if it's inappropriate at this point, but I just want to say thank you to you. And I know I wanted to say it to Matt earlier. With the highway department, they do an unbelievable job. And I know that, we hear a lot about certain situations that occur, but for the most part, as Matt said, these guys work around the clock, and it's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Welcome. Well, I was going to hold the cell tower to last, but I might as well start with it first. Just so the community knows, last night, and I'm going to mention this in my thank yous, I was invited to speak with Cub Scouts Arrow of Light Den right over at the Congregational Church. And this was a bunch of boys that were fifth graders. And amongst the pack, 3 times I was asked, what's going to happen with the cell tower. So it's not just the adults that are waiting for this patiently, it's the kiddos as well. So, yeah, it's going to be nice once the proverbial switch is finally flicked. In terms of the state funding, it's troubling, but of course it's reality. And it's not a new trend, you know, and it's just, again, to me, it reiterates the need for us to think out of the box, like with the road plan. You know, the fact is that we're going to have to cover the burden ourselves. Expecting the state to walk through with bags of money, it's just not going to happen. So, unfortunately, in one sense, it's going to keep us living within our means, but in the other, we're going to have to, again, perpetually think outside of the box and look down the road, which, again, I think, at least in my opinion, our financial team does a brilliant job of. I'm really excited about the Clear Government app. Being the nerd that I am, I know I will spend a lot of time, you know, going through the numbers because, well, let's put it this way. The numbers speak to the truth. And the reality is that, again, the financial team does a brilliant job in maybe not dealing with every possible solution, but we do the best we can within the means that we have. So this is just another layer of transparency that when you have those experts that sit at the computers behind the doors and use numbers from like 20 years ago, well, this is the way it should be, you know, they'll be able to see in real time, look, this is where your money goes. And if we were to shift it from here and put it over there, because this is what we think in the moment, there's going to be harm in the other departments that the funds come from. Yeah. So again, it's just going to, again, at least to me, hopefully it will reassure the public that, you know, a lot of thought goes into every decision that's made. And ultimately, we're always trying to do the best we can.
I'll have ClearGov come and do a presentation before the board during the implementation to let you know and the public know what it's all about.
Excellent, thank you. And in terms of apps, the code red, I did receive my message. And for those people who are unsure of it, I went in it the first day after it was presented to us, or at least we could access the app. I think it took me a whole whopping 2 minutes. I signed myself up, I signed my wife up, I put the home phone on there, put an email address or two. I think I even put my kids' numbers in there. 2 minutes, that's all it takes. And once you're in the system, you're in the system. And again, when you think of the situation that happened with the buses, a lot of people were saying, well, there was lack of communication. You know, this isn't going to solve the problem, but this is just another tool that we're going to have to be able to use to address those unforeseeable circumstances, in terms of communication. Yeah. So I'm really hopeful that the community takes this opportunity just to put their number in the system and just to be in the loop, so to speak. Communications package, I'm a huge supporter of this. And this was a while ago, but at our last building committee meeting for the police station, we did have a communications update. And we got to see one of those wonderful red and green maps of the town. And one of the numbers that stuck with me, which was most troubling, now consider the system that we have is 20 to 30 years old, and it's been patched together to keep it in operation. But based on the survey, what was labeled to be good coverage, we're not saying clear, we're not saying great, but good, only covered about 50% of the town. So to Ray's point, you know, there are people's lives on the line when a call goes through. But if there's only good coverage in 50% of the town, that could lead to a fatality. Right. So this new system, it's not going to make it 100% because we live in an awkward town that has lots of peaks and valleys and hills and granite, and you know it's hard to get signals through. But this is going to increase the capability. Right. And again, it's not going to be 100%, but heck, anything's better than 50%. Right. So I'm hopeful that the voters come out and support this at town meeting. And lastly, no, I think I covered it all. All right, then. I will shut myself up, and we'll move on to announcements, Selectmen's Roundtable, and correspondence. Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really just one thing I wanted to mention. Perhaps you know that I am not a big fan of Facebook. I try to stay away from Facebook as much as I can.
I don't blame you.
But I did want to mention the incident with the school bus. And particularly, I wanted to thank you. You wrote a very thoughtful post, I thought, on Facebook that day, which I thought helped to put some context around the issue that had occurred. And I guess I would just say that I thought you represented our board very well. And I just want to say thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Mike?
I don't have any comments, thank you.
Ray?
I think my biggest takeaway tonight was Tim's comment that, you know, we are essentially on our own. With all the work we do, with all, you know, and any input from the the state of Massachusetts. We are on our own, and it's about how we manage it and how we, we keep our own house in order. So, again, I appreciate all you do and all the folks that work with you. Keep us moving forward, so thank you.
Well said. Excellent. All right. I do have a couple of thank yous, because again, always here and there's always lots of stuff going on in town. I'd like to first off thank the Cub Scouts for the invitation. It was fun. In addition to talking about the cell phone tower, they asked me questions about big environmental issues or big concerns. And of course, one of the big issues that I used to highlight the complexities of municipal governance was, of course, the road issue. The roads go through town. That's how we get from A to B. But the roads break down, and we as town elders have to put thought into fixing the holes. And they were clever. Some of them said, well, what happens if you save some money by only filling it halfway? And again, they were thinking out of the box, so it was a lot of fun. So thank you to the Arrow Light Den for the invitation. I hope so. I'd also like to thank the Sons of Liberty, the Sons of the American Legion Post 414. They had a charity spaghetti dinner the other night, and again, those crew that put the effort into the kitchen had a wonderful meal presented, and there was a lot of people in attendance. And again, it was a charitable event, so I know the Congregational Church does this. There's a lot of events down the Dudley Hall. So people in town are looking for something to do. Hey, you get to go out on the town, have a good meal at low money that goes to charity. So hopefully people take opportunity of those type of events. Lastly, of course, we cannot leave the thank you without thanking those involved in bringing us this wonderful redecorated room. To Pam and Christine and John and everyone else involved in the decorating committee. Hey, all you have to do is look around the room. We're moving into maybe the 20th century, possible 21st century, so we're getting there. The chairs will be the icing
Sing
on
in
the cake.
moderation, as Chairman
That's true.
Hebert generally says.
Moderation.
Selectman Hebert.
Absolutely. My last thank you would, of course, be to St. Mark's community for, once again, their generous donations. We brought the delivery down this past Sunday, the monthly delivery, and my truck was overflowing to the point where I had to put stuff on the back seat, and another vehicle followed us down. So, as Michelle says, if it wasn't for the generosity of the people in town, be it St. Mark's or the Congregational Church or Market 32, there would be no food there. And we have over 200 families that draw upon this. So just the continual generosity is, again, to your point, we're a community and we're looking out for ourselves. So thank you to everyone who donated. And lastly, I talked to Michelle this morning, and the list is, thanks to the generosity, relatively small in terms of needs. She's looking for canned ham, pancake mixes, syrups, chicken broth, mac and cheese, and of course, always soaps, detergents, and so forth. All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I second.
Hearing a motion and second. Any further comments, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you.